Pablo married me, a mute, for money. I know he despises me. Luckily, I don't like him either. In my mind, I curse his dad, curse his mom, curse his first love. I curse him too, but what I didn't know was that he can read minds. Every word I mutter silently, he hears clearly. Later, he heard me say in my heart, Pablo, I'm dying. You're finally free. Chapter 1. I don't know when Pablo started reading minds. The first time I sensed something was off was when I was furiously cursing his first love right in front of him. Oh, Pablo darling, quit acting so cute. You're not some little girl anymore. What's with this act? She knows I can't talk, yet still makes me explain myself. Explain what exactly? Pablo suddenly turned. His brows knitted as he looked me up and down. The way he stared at me sent a chill down my spine. I signed to him. What's wrong? Pablo's voice was icy. Do you have a problem with Gloria? I was stunned. I had just cursed Gloria in my mind, and here he was confronting me? But I could only play dumb, tilting my head and smiling at him with a blank, innocent look. Pablo gave a dismissive scoff and turned back to continue talking to Gloria. His voice was gentle, soft, perfectly warm. I kept my smile on the outside while inside my mind, idiot. Pablo. Chapter 2. When the event ended, Gloria's reluctance to leave Pablo was written all over her face. Pablo's parents were also there tonight. Seeing the two of them cozied up didn't prompt any reaction from them. In fact, Pablo's mom even pulled me aside with a smile. Kelly, let those men handle their business. Let's wait in the car. I smiled and nodded. In my mind, like mother, like son. No wonder a shameless son has a shameless mom. Pablo. I noticed his expression darken, but I thought it was just because I was walking too slowly, and I never would have guessed it was due to him reading my mind. When I waved to him, I tossed in another thought. The idiot's father is just as bad. Pablo. Chapter 3. I waited in the car with his mom for over half an hour. Finally, Pablo and his dad ambled over. He turned to his mom. Celine and I are heading back to our place. What? His mom seemed taken aback and was about to question him when a look from his dad stopped her. She caught on and smiled knowingly. All right. You two go home and sleep. As soon as I got out, their car sped off in a flash. Pablo just stood there, showing no signs of wanting to head home. I looked at him in confusion. Pablo, so it's not just Gloria, you have a problem with my parents too? How could he know every time I curse someone in my head? I looked at Pablo, even more puzzled. But Pablo didn't tell me he could read minds. He only coldly warned, don't give Gloria a hard time. She was heartbroken enough when we broke up. Heartbroken? She cried for about 2 minutes. Then, with a heartfelt look, she told Pablo, even if you marry someone else, I'll always wait for you. On the day I married Pablo, she showed up too, even wearing a wedding dress. She didn't actually come in, though. She just took a picture outside and posted it online, wearing my wedding dress. Standing where you are, doesn't that make me your bride too? That post is still pinned at the top of her profile. To her, it's her deepest love for Pablo. To me, it's the ultimate insult. For that alone, I'd be justified in giving her a hard time. But Pablo came to warn me on her behalf. Inwardly, I let out a cold laugh and boldly let my thoughts spill out. If you're so in love, why don't you have the guts to divorce me? If it weren't to ease my mom's worries, I'd never have married you. With your dumb look. How dare you disdain me for being mute? You may have a mouth, but I've yet to hear you say anything worthwhile. Celine, Pablo snapped, gritting his teeth as he called my name. Startled out of my rant, I looked at him, asking with just my eyes, what is it? Pablo, you called me an idiot? Though everything I said was true, it's mortifying to be caught in the act. Chapter 4. I signed to Pablo. How do you know I insulted you? Pablo, unwilling to reveal his mind-reading ability. He came up with a flimsy excuse. Your face says it all. Apparently, my expression was enough to convey every curse. Puzzled, I touched my face, incredulous that I'd somehow lost all control over my expressions. Then, I plastered on a sincere smile and signed. I didn't insult you. Pablo closed his eyes, clearly frustrated to the point of internal turmoil. Feigning innocence, I turned and walked to the car on my own, but my mood felt as heavy as the endless dark night, where no glimmer of dawn could be seen. The reason Pablo and I married was partly because my mother was gravely ill, and partly because the Fu family's finances had collapsed. I'd always known Pablo married me for money. He despised that I was mute. Fortunately, I didn't like him either. In the year or so we've lived together, every bit of kindness and consideration I've shown has been an act. The doctor said my mom doesn't have much time left. Maybe 3 months, for her final days. I don't want her to worry about anything, even though I despise Pablo, and even though I've wanted a divorce for a long time. I can endure it for my mom's sake. Yet it seems fate has it out for me. I was diagnosed with cancer. The doctor who had been treating my mom was more devastated than I was. Kelly, you're so young. How could this happen? I was heartbroken too, but alongside the sadness, there was a sense of relief. If I die, I can be with my mom again. Maybe that's not so bad. Chapter 5. I stayed at the hospital that night. Late into the evening, I received a call from an unknown number. It was a friend of Pablo's, saying, "Sis-in-law, Pablo's drunk. Could you come pick him up?" Someone nearby hastily reminded him, "You idiot! Sis-in-law is mute. She can't talk. So how can she answer you?" "Oh, right." His voice took on an awkward tone. "Sorry, sis-in-law. If you can come pick him up, could you text me?" I hadn't planned to go, but maybe because my time was running out, long-repressed desires were suddenly surging. I wanted to finalize a divorce with Pablo as soon as possible. He'd probably agree. The divorce cooling-off period is only a month. It's short, but it's time that's precious to me. I want a clean break with Pablo before I die. I don't want to be tied to the Fu family even in death. So, I went to pick Pablo up and bring him home. He was thoroughly drunk, lying obediently on the couch. In the past, I would have gone to the kitchen to make him some sobering soup. Then I'd help him change and guide him to bed. But tonight, I just sat quietly beside him. I waited for him to wake up so I could ask for a divorce right away. Chapter 6. Pablo was pampered from a young age, and after we married, I took care of him quite well. Lying on the couch for just a little while, he started feeling uncomfortable and sat up with a frown. I stared at him intently. My gaze must have been so cold that it snapped him out of his drunken stupor. For a moment, he seemed more sober. "Why are you staring at me like that?" he asked, irritated. I signed to him. "Let's get a divorce." Pablo couldn't understand. In the year we'd lived together, he'd made little effort to understand me. More complex or less common signs, he was clueless about them, because he'd never cared to learn. Inwardly, I sneered. Talking to an idiot is exhausting. "Pablo." I switched to my phone, typing a line and showing it to him. Still a bit drunk, he stared at the words "get a divorce" in confusion. Divorce? Who's divorcing whom? I pointed to him, then to myself. This time, he finally understood, but he couldn't believe that I, a mute, dared to bring up divorce, especially considering that I had no one backing me. My father had passed away years ago, and my mother was now bedridden with illness. Our relatives had once tried to snatch our family's assets from my mother. After they failed, they'd resented us ever since. Other than my mom, no one really cared if I lived or died. So Pablo couldn't understand why someone like me would have the nerve to ask for a divorce. He chuckled in disbelief. "You don't actually think you'd have men lining up for you if you divorced me, do you?" I shook my head, keeping my gaze firm. This only frustrated him more. "Fine. If you want a divorce, I agree, but everything we agreed on before stays the same, and your family's investment won't be refunded." I nodded. I considered it payment for my mother's happiness this past year. A costly deal, but what's done is done, and there was no reason to demand it back. Pablo looked at me with utter confusion, even slowing his speech. "Celine, why are you suddenly asking for a divorce?" It was a question he should have asked first, if he'd had even the slightest affection for me. But since he didn't, he'd expressed anger first, only then asking why. I didn't answer, just gave him a small smile. As I stood, Pablo suddenly grabbed my wrist, repeating, "Why do you suddenly want a divorce?" The financial loss was substantial. Without a reason, the sudden demand was baffling. He was probably too used to being adored and couldn't handle being dumped by a mute woman. But if he thought about it, he should be happy. Once we're divorced, he could be with Gloria openly. A wedding, a title, everything Gloria wanted. He could finally give her. How wonderful for him. Chapter 7. I still remember when the Fu family first proposed marriage. I had considered living a peaceful life with Pablo. Even without love, a harmonious, steady life would have been enough. People only saw our wealth now, but few knew how close my mom and I had come to being harmed after my father's passing. And it was then that I lost my voice. My mother was always worried no one would want me, and even more worried that I'd be mistreated after marriage. So she gave her all to support the Fu family, to help Pablo, hoping that I could be just a bit happier in marriage. But on the day of the wedding, I was thoroughly humiliated. I even asked Pablo if he could speak to Gloria about deleting that pinned post. But Pablo said, "What people post is their freedom. Who are you to control it? And what I do or don't do is also my choice. Don't try to control me." That's when I realized that Pablo wasn't even worth trying to be polite with. After that, I stopped caring about him. In Pablo's mind, my mere existence was a restriction. But finally, that restriction was about to be lifted. "Pablo, I'm dying. You're finally free." The thought crossed my mind, and Pablo's grip on my wrist loosened. Shock filled his eyes, but I didn't know he'd heard my inner voice. I was just relieved he'd stopped asking why I wanted a divorce, sparing me the need to explain. After all, he didn't love me, didn't care about me. Why would my life or death matter to him? Explaining would only cheapen my dignity. I turned and walked toward the stairs, step by step, heading for the bedroom. With every step, I couldn't help but sigh. What a waste of a handsome face. If only he had a better character, he'd be perfect. And Gloria doesn't seem to love him all that much. Otherwise, why let him bear the burden of being branded a cheater? The two of them deserve each other. At least if they're together, they won't drag anyone else down. But still, it's such a pity. I came to this world and never knew what true love felt like. If I'd met someone decent, maybe I'd have experienced it. Pablo isn't worthy. Chapter 8. After I went to bed, Pablo went out to meet his friends. One of his childhood friends, Bruno, noticed his sour expression immediately. On top of that, Pablo still smelled of alcohol, and his clothes were disheveled. Bruno asked, "Did you and Celine have a fight?" Pablo shot him a look, annoyed that he was so accurate yet also missing the mark. Divorce was far more serious than a fight, and Celine was sick, seriously ill. It seemed. Pablo picked up his cup and took a long drink. Only, instead of alcohol, he tasted tea. He remembered then that he and Bruno were drinking tea, not liquor. "When did you stop drinking?" Pablo asked. "Bruno, I stopped 2 years ago." "But 2 years ago, you quit pretty abruptly." Bruno didn't respond. Pablo continued, "If I remember right, you quit because of Laura, didn't you? She had that much of an impact on you?" Bruno shot him a look of his own. "Since when did tea make you talk so much?" Pablo chuckled softly. After a long silence, Bruno suddenly spoke. "She did have a big impact. When she left, my life felt like it died with her. But she didn't mean much to you while she was around. That's why you should cherish people while they're there." You too. Among our group, we ranked ourselves by age. Bruno, the oldest, rarely lectured anyone, especially about relationships. Maybe tonight was different because we were both feeling down, which opened the floodgates. "Pablo, what do you really think about Celine and Gloria?" "I haven't felt anything for Gloria in a long time. I just felt guilty about the breakup since it was so sudden, and I wanted to make up for it a little." "And Celine?" "Celine." Pablo pondered for a long time but couldn't find the words. Bruno guessed. "You're used to her? Grew fond of her over time?" "Pablo, something like that." It wasn't until tonight when I suddenly demanded a divorce that he realized just how terrifying familiarity could be. In that moment, he pictured coming home after work to an empty house, and the thought filled him with unease. So Bruno advised, "If you're over your ex, don't hurt the person by your side." "Pablo, Since when were you so full of life advice? Since I know what it's like to lose someone. Take it from me, treat Celine well, or you'll regret it. Pablo, regret my ass. Bruno gave a cold chuckle. You better hope you keep that attitude. Chapter 09. The next morning, after I got up, I noticed that Pablo wasn't home. So I sent him a message. Where did you go? He didn't reply. After a while, I heard some noise outside the door. I thought it was Pablo returning. After all, he had agreed to the divorce last night. Today, we should go to the Civil Affairs Bureau. But when I opened the door, I saw Gloria standing outside instead. She had never been friendly with me without Pablo by her side. She was even more arrogant and mocking. Let's talk, she said. Oh, I almost forgot. You're a mute, she added, sneering. Like Pablo, she had a mouth but didn't know how to use it properly. Still, I was curious about what she wanted to talk about, and what qualifications she had to talk to me. I stepped aside to let her in. Gloria raised an eyebrow in surprise, then sat down on the sofa. I turned to grab paper and a pen, ready to communicate with her. Before I could write, Gloria asked, "Aren't you going to offer me a drink? You have guests, don't you?" Who did she think she was? Fortunately, I didn't love Pablo, or she would have been my enemy. I smiled, bowed my head, and wrote, "Let's get straight to the point. Don't waste my time." Gloria scoffed coldly. What? You think that because you married Pablo, you're set for life? You too will get divorced eventually. It was your Pablo who married me and got a short-lived sense of security. I wrote back. If it weren't for my family's investment, the Fu family would have gone bankrupt long ago. Though the Fu family had recovered now, they wouldn't dare to kick me out. If I didn't mention the divorce, Pablo would probably continue living with me. Who did Gloria think she was? I looked at her coldly. No words, no threats, just the sharp contrast of our gazes, which said everything. Gloria was enraged. She suddenly stood up. You only have money, but no matter how rich you are, you're still a mute. I asked Pablo about it. You've been married for over a year, and he's never touched you. Even if you don't divorce, you'll never have children. Your dad's dead. Your mom's dying. And when you die, everything you have will. Slap. The loud crack of my slap echoed through the room. Gloria fell back onto the sofa, clutching her face, unable to get up for a while. I hit her hard, my palm tingling. She brought up my family? If she wanted Pablo, I could give him to her. But bringing up my parents and talking about whether I live or die was a different matter. She deserved to be slapped. Chapter 10. After Gloria snapped out of it, she started yelling at me. She wanted to hit me, but she knew Pablo was coming back. So she began to play the victim. Pablo entered just as she was crying out. Seeing the marks of my slap on her face, he immediately turned to me and asked, "Celine, what did you do?" Here we go again. This scene had played out so many times before. Sometimes, I felt like I was just a part of their affair game, an accessory to their excitement. But today, I wasn't going to play anymore. I picked up my phone, unlocked it, and started playing a recording. It was from the times when Gloria and I were alone together. In the recording, she mocked me, insulted me, and cursed me out in the cruelest ways. Gloria was stunned. Pablo was too. The recording wasn't even finished when Gloria snapped back to reality and tried to grab my phone. "Pablo!" she cried, but her voice was filled with panic as she tried to explain. "Those weren't my words. She faked the recording. She's slandering me." Pablo closed his eyes and told her coldly, "Leave, Pablo." She pleaded, "Leave." I won't say it a third time. Gloria's tears streamed down her face. She was a great actress. If she went into showbiz, she might even win an Oscar. Chapter 11. After Gloria left, Pablo turned to me. Seeing that I was still cold, he spoke softly. "Celine, we need to talk." The same lines as Gloria. Now, I hated it even more. I coldly smiled, grabbed the paper and pen again, and wrote, "There's nothing to talk about except the divorce." Pablo hesitated before speaking again. "This morning, I went to the hospital to visit your mom. After a year of marriage, this was the first time he'd gone to visit her alone. And it only happened after I mentioned the divorce. I didn't feel surprised, just disgusted. You agreed to my conditions. Why did you go see my mom? He sighed. You haven't told her that you're sick, have you? How did he know I was sick? I jumped up, my calmness slipping away. Pablo looked at me seriously, then answered. I can hear what you think. You don't need to write anymore. I froze. So that's why, when I cursed his father, his mother, and Gloria in my thoughts before, he'd always asked me about it. He had heard every word clearly. When did you start hearing my thoughts? 6 months ago, the night you came back from the hospital, he explained. That night, my mom's health had suddenly worsened. The doctor had mentioned a treatment plan with low chances of success. But while I sat by her hospital bed until 2 a.m., Pablo was out drinking with Gloria, partying like nothing was wrong. Gloria even posted about it on social media, enjoying herself openly, while I was in agony, unable to even cry out loud. Chapter 12. I hadn't expected Pablo to be able to hear my thoughts that night. But now, I finally understood. When I returned home that early morning, he had also just gotten back. He must have noticed my sour expression and muttered something under his breath. I didn't pay attention at the time, thinking he was annoyed with me for not taking care of him while he was drunk. Now, I realized that in that moment, he had actually heard my inner thoughts. Why did you have to make my mom sick? Pablo deserves to be sick, not her. He should die. Pablo was silent for a long moment, then muttered, I always thought you were a petty person. You couldn't stand me being friends with Gloria after we broke up. You secretly cursed her in your heart. I didn't know she cursed you too. She had cursed me a lot, and it had been pretty nasty, but neither she nor Pablo had realized I had recorded every single time. At first, I didn't intend to use the recordings against Gloria. I just wanted to have something in case I needed it later. But Gloria had delivered herself to me on a silver platter. If I didn't use it now, she'd just get more arrogant in the future. I stared coldly at Pablo and asked with my mind, now that you know everything, what are you going to do about it? Pablo pursed his lips, hesitant to speak. He didn't want to talk about Gloria, and I didn't push him. Instead, I asked, when are we going to the Civil Affairs Bureau to file for the divorce? Pablo sighed. Celine, you should focus on getting better. What I do or don't do doesn't concern you. This was something he had said to me a long time ago, and now I returned the words to him. Without waiting for his reaction, I stood up and walked out. Behind me, Pablo called out, Celine, where are you going? None of your business. Fool! Pablo fell silent. Chapter 13. I went to the hospital. The nurse saw me and smiled as she greeted me. Young Master Fu came by this morning. I nodded. She noticed I wasn't surprised and quietly asked, are you two okay now? I shook my head, pulling out my phone to show her a message. We're getting a divorce. The nurse was startled, gripping my hand. Did he suggest it? No, I did. I didn't want Pablo, even though others saw him as handsome and capable. He didn't love me. He didn't care for me. So I didn't want him. The nurse saw the determination in my eyes and immediately understood. She asked softly, what will you do now? Dad was long gone, and Mom was about to leave too. I had a serious illness. Even with lots of money, I couldn't buy a caring person. The nurse seemed more upset than me, her eyes red. I lowered my head, unable to look into her eyes. If I did, I'd cry, but my tears made no sound. Silent pain, like a boomerang, flowed out with the tears and stabbed back into my heart. I knew that feeling well. It hurt so much it made me wish I could just die. Chapter 14. The nurse said that Pablo had a long talk with my mom this morning. After he left, I saw my mom quietly wiping away a tear. The nurse didn't ask further, afraid of making Mom more upset. But I wanted to know. I texted my mom, what did Pablo say to you this morning? What's there to say? Mom smiled brightly. He said your relationship's warming up and to wait for grandchildren. He won't. Why not? Mom lightly rolled her eyes at me. Didn't you always say Pablo was good to you? That was all a lie. To make the story more believable, I even bought myself gifts, pretending they were from Pablo. In Mom's eyes, Pablo was busy, but still good to me. Now, I was about to reveal my lies. Mom, Pablo and I are getting a divorce. Mom wasn't shocked, just a bit surprised. She softly asked, "Did Pablo bully you? He doesn't love me." "I see." Mom reached out and hugged me, her calm facade suddenly crumbling. She choked. "You're such a good girl, Kelly. It's his loss that he doesn't love you. You've endured so much for me." "Thank you." I shook my head, not feeling the least bit tired, even though Pablo still clung to Gloria after marriage. I didn't love him, so I wasn't sad or upset, just amused. What hurt the most was not having asked for a divorce sooner, not telling my mom the truth sooner. That way, my mom wouldn't have heard from Pablo that he didn't love me. I imagined how heartbroken she must have been when Pablo said that to her this morning. The treasure she held so dear, discarded so easily. Mom cried, and I cried, but Mom comforted me through her tears. "It's okay, Kelly. You're such a good person. You'll meet someone better in the future, and Pablo will regret it." I nodded, smiling, but deep down, I knew Pablo wouldn't regret it, and I wouldn't have a future. Chapter 15. Pablo was probably worried about money, dragging his feet on the divorce. I sent him several messages, but he either said he was busy or didn't respond at all. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore and told his parents about the divorce. They exploded. "We've turned a blind eye to the thing with Gloria, but you need to be more careful. You can't let Celine reach her breaking point. If she makes this public, people will sympathize with her because of her single-parent status and her muteness. It will affect your reputation and the company's stock price. You must apologize to Celine immediately, no matter what. You cannot divorce." After scolding Pablo, they turned to me and played the emotional card. They brought gifts to the hospital to show how much they liked me. "If Pablo did anything wrong, we'll scold him and make sure he fixes it. Kelly, you can't just get angry and talk about divorce. Saying that only hurts a relationship." "Relationship? What relationship do I have with that fool Pablo?" Just then, Pablo entered the room and heard my thoughts clearly. He scowled. I looked innocent, silently adding in my mind, "Super fool." No matter how much I insulted him, only he could hear me. To his parents, I was always the wronged one. Pablo couldn't say anything, so he just called me outside. He said, "I can agree to anything except divorce. Would you agree if I kept a man outside?" "Celine, just divorce me now. At least let me have peace before I die. Do you really hate me that much?" I didn't expect him to ask that, but his expression was serious. He said, "Celine, let's try again, okay?" Chapter 16. I suspected Pablo had been driven crazy by his parents. How else could he say such ridiculous things? Had we even started? If not, how could we try again? I replied seriously, word by word, "Pablo, I've never liked you. Even from the beginning, I just wanted to live a good life. It had nothing to do with love. While I still want a peaceful separation, let's go get the divorce papers. If this drags on, I'll sue for divorce, no matter how ugly it got. I wouldn't be the only one embarrassed." Pablo scoffed, biting his teeth. "Celine, I really underestimated you." Flattery. As Pablo got angrier, the nurse suddenly ran in, urgently calling me, "Kelly." I looked up, meeting her anxious gaze, and an uneasy feeling settled in my heart. The nurse urged me to return to the ward quickly. "Your mom, it's bad. She's asking for you." I felt like thunder had struck, buzzing in my ears. Luckily, the nurse supported me and helped me get back to the room quickly. Doctors and nurses had gathered in a circle, looking grim. Pablo's parents were also there, looking worried. His mom tried to comfort me. "Kelly, don't worry. We're getting the best doctor. Your mom will be fine." "She won't be fine. We were rich enough to afford any medicine, to hire the best doctors. But some things can't be bought." After a series of tests, the doctor turned back and shook his head helplessly. At that moment, I felt my heart break. As the doctors and nurses dispersed, I saw my mom reaching out for me. I instinctively walked up, trembling as I took her hand. "Kelly." Mom's voice was faint. "Mom is leaving. Don't cry." I wanted to obey her, to let her go in peace, but my tears flowed uncontrollably. Mom lifted her other hand to wipe my tears, but it was too weak, and it fell again. Kelly, don't cry. I nodded furiously, opening my mouth to speak. I remembered that when I was a child, I could make sounds. If I could call out to her now, would it reduce some of the regret? But I couldn't make a sound. No matter how wide I opened my mouth, no sound came out, until Pablo stepped forward and gently told Mom, "Kelly wants to call you Mom." In her dimming eyes, a faint light flickered. She smiled and nodded at me. "I heard you." Then she signaled everyone else to leave, leaving just me and Pablo. I thought she was going to tell him to take care of me, but instead, she grabbed his hand and, almost pleadingly, whispered, "Can you agree to divorce Kelly?" Pablo froze, looking at me. I suddenly stopped crying, pressing my hand to my chest. It hurt so much, as if something inside had finally shattered. Before, Mom had worried that after her death, no one would care for me, so she wanted someone to look after me. Now, she was worried I'd be mistreated after her death, so she begged Pablo to set me free. "Will you agree to divorce Kelly?" Pablo, either unable to refuse her dying wish or touched by his conscience, finally agreed. Mom let out a relieved sigh, patting my head. "Kelly, be yourself, and be happy, okay? Mom is going to find Dad now. You come later. Be our daughter in the next life, okay?" Kelly. In the last moment, I held her in my arms. She passed away in my arms. I held her hand, feeling her life slip away. "Mom, I may not be obedient this last time. I'm coming to find you and Dad soon." Chapter 17. When I woke up, I found myself in the hospital room. Pablo was sitting by my bed. I didn't know how much time had passed, but a stubble had already appeared on his chin. Seeing me stir under the covers, Pablo quickly said, "I've already made arrangements for your mom's funeral. Don't worry. Leave." The one sharp word left Pablo stunned. He suppressed his temper, saying, "Celine, I promised your mom I'd divorce you. Can you at least stop hating me so much?" "I can't stop hating you unless you die." Pablo, with no progress in the conversation, he stood up and went outside for a cigarette to calm down. When he came back, he saw me quickly typing something on my phone. Pablo, ever sharp, immediately sensed something was wrong and reached over to snatch the phone out of my hands. When he saw what I had typed, his eyes widened. "Celine, do you really have to go this far? I've told you before, if you won't divorce me, I don't mind making this public." I was ready to send a divorce statement. I didn't care whether it affected Pablo's reputation or Food Group's stock price. I was going to die anyway. Why should I care about others? Pablo stared at me for a long time, seeing no sign of retreat. Finally, he sighed in resignation. "Celine, I've already promised your mom I'll divorce you. Don't mention my mom. If you hadn't gone to the hospital and said you didn't like me, she wouldn't have been so hurt and passed away so quickly." Pablo froze for a moment, explaining, "I didn't say that. I went to the hospital to check on your condition. I thought since I was already there, I might as well see your mom, but I never said anything like that." It wasn't Pablo's words, but my mom's sharpness that made her realize the truth from his actions. Pablo apologized. "It's my fault. I should have told you first. If he had, at least we would have been prepared, and many things could have been smoothed over. My mom wouldn't have been led to those conclusions." I was full of resentment, but when I thought about it, I realized I had no one to blame but myself. If I had spoken up sooner about not liking Pablo, if I hadn't held back on our wedding day, so many if onlys. I was so tired. Chapter 18. The Fu family originally planned to hold a large funeral for my mom, but later, I requested a simpler one. After the burial, I moved back to my own place. Gossip media followed Pablo around, and several times they caught him downstairs at my apartment, but he never came inside. Naturally, rumors spread that our two families had fallen out and that Pablo and I were about to divorce. This news led to a drop in Food Group's stock price. Pablo's parents came to see me, hoping I would move back in. "Celine, you need to think about us too. To be honest, Pablo hasn't done anything wrong to you. If our family falls apart, what good does it do you? Why make such a scene? It's..." Mom, Pablo hurried over and interrupted his mother's words. You two go back. His parents were not pleased. Standing stiffly with cold expressions, Pablo turned back to glance at me. He saw me sitting there, motionless. There was no sound in my heart either. Suddenly, he seemed to grow anxious. He stepped forward and asked, Celine, would you like to go for a walk with me? Since moving back, I hadn't left the house for more than half a month. In this large house, I was all alone. I couldn't speak, and no one spoke to me. I let myself sink further and further into this silent world. Deeper and deeper. Chapter 19. Pablo didn't pay attention to his parents. He took me outside. After getting into the car, he asked, Is there anywhere you want to go? I looked out at the bright sunshine. So intense. It felt like the blood that had almost died within me suddenly came alive again. I spoke in my heart, I want to go to the mall. Pablo nodded. He knew I probably didn't feel like shopping, but he still followed my request. I bought a bright red dress and had the sales associate do my makeup. Pablo gradually realized what I was doing. I wanted to look my best, to present myself in the best light to see my parents. When we arrived at the cemetery, the sunset was perfect. The vibrant twilight cast a golden hue over the tombstones. I stood in front of the grave, holding the hem of my dress, and twirled gently. At the same time, I asked in my heart, Mom, Dad, do I look good today? Does it remind you of the time when I was little, and you were both still here, and I wore a red dress? If I come to see you like this, will you recognize me? Living alone is so exhausting. I miss you so much. Pablo stood behind me, and every word I spoke in my heart, he could hear. I didn't mind that he heard it. At this point, I really didn't care about anything anymore. But Pablo didn't want me to be indifferent. He stepped forward and embraced me from behind. His hoarse voice seemed to be struggling with something. Celine, there's news from the hospital. They've found a suitable match. Once you have the transplant, you can live a long, healthy life. There's no need. But didn't you say you didn't want to become a ghost of the Fu family after you die? I've arranged for the surgery to be a month from now. We'll go to the Civil Affairs Bureau to finalize the divorce first. Then you can have the surgery. When you wake up, you'll have the divorce certificate in hand. That offer was tempting. At least, before my mom died, I would have agreed without hesitation. But now, I didn't want to continue living at all. The physical pain was something I could endure, but the pain in my heart seemed like it would swallow everything. Pablo, I'm tired. Then, please, will you agree to the surgery? I shook my head. Suddenly, cold liquid dripped onto my neck, and then Pablo's voice became even hoarser. Your parents would want you to live well. Do it for them, not for me, okay? We can go to the Civil Affairs Bureau first. Then you can go into the operating room. Celine, okay. Chapter 20. The day we went to get the divorce certificate, Pablo looked in a good mood. He wore a brand new suit, with his shirt collar perfectly stiff. He looked down at the little book in his hand, then lifted his head to say, I'll take you to the hospital. I shook my head, but he insisted on taking me. It's a deal that after we get the divorce certificate, you'll go straight to the operating room. If I don't see it with my own eyes, what if you run away halfway? I didn't respond. For some reason, I had a strange feeling today. Even though Pablo seemed to be at ease, there was a heavy aura around him. When we arrived at the hospital, everything was ready. Pablo followed me to the door of the operating room. Before I went in, he leaned in and said, Celine, don't be afraid. Everything will be okay. I wasn't afraid at all. In fact, he seemed to be the one more afraid. Maybe Bruno's words that early morning had woken him up. Maybe, after all this time, he had developed feelings. But it was too late. It was all too late. The surgery was a success. Before I was discharged, a lawyer from Fu Group came to see me and asked me to sign some papers. It was the compensation Pablo had voluntarily offered after our divorce. When converted, it was almost half of the money my family had originally invested. The lawyer said it was the biggest compensation Pablo could offer within his means. Pablo didn't show up. For a long time after, he neither appeared in front of me nor in the public eye. Even Pablo's parents became much more low-key. When the gossip media directly asked about Pablo, they avoided the topic. I transferred all the family assets into an account balance. Then, I left. The weather that day was terrible, with rain falling non-stop. I stood by the glass wall at the airport, watching the rain fall outside. Suddenly, I saw a familiar figure in the reflection. But when I turned to look, the crowd passing by was made up of strangers. They hurried along, all chasing after a better life. None of them had time to look back at the road they had come. Chapter 21. 2 years later, during the Chinese New Year, Pablo, who hadn't been seen for a long time, posted an update on his social media, "Happy New Year." The accompanying photo showed an airport background. But in the photo, there was no one else except the reflection in the glass. It seemed like no one knew who he was wishing a Happy New Year. And yet, it seemed like everyone knew. The post received many likes, but no comments. After Pablo posted the update, he was about to put down his phone when suddenly, a strange call came in. The number was from abroad. When he answered, there was a long silence on the other end. Then, a voice finally came through. Soft and sweet like the sound of heaven, "Happy New Year." It wasn't a voice in his head, it was a real, clear voice. Pablo didn't respond, and the call ended soon after. But that day became the happiest New Year of Pablo's life. She said, "Happy New Year, Celine. May you be happy too."